I try to just come back full circle, go back to the purpose of why we are doing Being in Time. I know I was, kind of asked to, and I always, I've taught it. I did it as a 1992 Everyday Life reading group with students at CUNY many years ago. The comparative literature people in particular. Andrew Long, Michael Waldron, Tara McGann, Yvonne LaSalle was there for a little while, Carmen Medeiros. Anyway, it was a very good group of people, Elliot Weinbacher, all of whom are now, except for Tara, are teaching, in universities, and, one is in Bolivia, actually, a friend of Garcia Linera, Carmen Medeiros, very active radical and revolutionist, and Andrew's on the West Coast, and Claremont, and anyway, it's a good group. Michael went the way of hedge funds and made a lot of money, and kind of retired on the Pacific Coast, and so Being in Time and good reading groups have hopefully good results in a way. So the idea was really to engage, right? What's that? What?
Maybe that is the way out.
The way out. Yeah, I'm working on that on another level, right? Yeah.
Blood on the streets in Wall Street now, so it's.
There's a little bit of blood. Yeah. There may be more blood to come.
Maybe more.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. We'll talk about that too.
The Chinese chairman said, the Chinese are prepared to eat rice in a steel bowl if necessary. That's it. That means go ahead with your stupid, trade wars. We don't have to use iPhones. We can just use.
Well, they've tried this with Russia too. Look what Putin did with his military during this period, and you can also say the same thing about, China. What does this really mean? It's losing its, this is a bunch of castrated old white males, who have nothing better to do than get John Bolton, Mr. Mustache, back in the chair with Nikki Haley, who looks like she's been on, who knows what for 20 years. And and this is pretty disgusting, this face being shown the world. I mean, in a way. It's not so much greater in, obviously, Hungary and what we're seeing in Poland and what we're seeing in Turkey and all of this. And even Italy, the five-star movement is very disturbing and kind of right populism where we're seeing globally. But on the other hand, there is
the chaos in Washington outstrips anything.
Yes.
I mean, they're much more refined dictatorships and authoritarian governments.
Absolutely. So anyway, going back to this, I mean, one of the reasons was to kind of situate Heidegger once again within what is, I think, not really been taken that seriously by the left, except to call it fascist or to look at it as an abreaction in the history of the world. Especially the conservative revolution that happens in Germany in the 1920s and, goes way back to, the 19th century Volks principle. So anyway, Heidegger is certainly part of this. I know that we spoke about the three great names. I mean, Heidegger, Ernst Junger, and of course Carl Schmitt are the three leading names of this. There are a lot of other people associated with this, obviously, but the philosopher, the soldier, warrior, novelist, essayist, and I recommend, I know Arto has read it, The Worker.
I'm reading
It's a very interesting work in lieu of, and maybe when we do Marx, I'm thinking maybe we'll take some sections from that and compare it to Marx's notions of alienation, because Marx is sort of an antagonist of Junger, and we can see maybe some differences and distinctions going on between Junger, and Marx. So the Worker, on the Worker, of course, total mobilization, and with Heidegger, something that Deleuze and Guattari take up, On the Line. Where they investigate the war line, the Maginot Line, and, Junger wants to cross it. Heidegger says, no, we must study it, study the border line, and what, Karl Jaspers used to call the limit situation. where does the situation of the limit existentially? And this is what they're really trying to do, the limit situation. And then Schmidt, of course, is the author, and this has come back with a vengeance, political theology. Yeah, very, very active in the in the literature today, and new kinds of ways of thinking about politics. Our friend Andreas Kalivas at the New School in the political science department is an expert on Carl Schmitt. So if you ever get a chance to hear him, I think we did a panel with Andreas on Syriza years ago, and he's very good on Schmitt. One of the best people, and my friend Miguel Vaught there. So we have a lot of people that have written on Schmitt and know him extremely well.
What's his last name again?
Andreas Kalivas. Kalivas is better pronunciation. Yeah. So, so going back to this, I mean, the stakes, as most of you know and still know, was always what to do with the mass, right? How does one begin a critical mass, and how does one mobilize, right? And in the Heideggerian tradition, the Volks, right? The Volk principle, the Volks principle. And this became obviously a battle between left and right. And on the right you had, of course, Ortega y Gasset in Spain. You had a whole group of people in French Catholic France, around the journal, partially around Esprit, and also Action Française, out of which many serious thinkers came. Including the writer Maurice Blanchot, who I like very much, and very crucial to the work of
Was he a
Derrida.
rightist, or?
He was a rightist in the beginning, and then he became a signer of the manifesto of the 121 against the war in Algeria, which is another great moment in the history of French intellectual life and confrontation. So, anyway, going back to this period, I mean, obviously on one level of the stakes was for Heidegger to, kind of have the ambition of the ontology being itself is to rewrite ontology, right? In the light of a failure of Western metaphysics, right? So he set himself this task of the rewriting of the history of ontology, to rewrite ontology. And I'm sorry about the language today, but really in a way he's really breaking through, the vessels and he's really just, taking ontology on in an extremely aggressive and violent way. There's no question about it. It's really a breaking through, So the rewriting of the ontology raises, as we remember in the beginning, right, the prejudices about being and what we have first of all forgotten, right? So this becomes a question of memory and forgetfulness early on. We have also forgotten the question, right? And how to question being. We've also forgot the meaning of being. So this is another thing. And so the work itself is really about a reconstructive attempt in going back to a kind of pre-predicative moment. This is Husserlian language. He doesn't use this, but I'm going to use it today.
Mike, can you explain a little bit what pre-predicative means?
Yeah,
Because I hear it all the
pre-predicate
time,
means
but I don't know
that you're
what
going
it
to
is.
get back beyond that of the conceptual, right? You're going to the pre-conceptual, or really into the moment of almost direct intuition, right? To get back to the experience, or return to the experience of the things themselves.
So this is sort of, to be pre-predicative means not to think logically in the sense
No,
of
it's not a question
syllogistic,
of
or no?
logic or syllogism. It's a question of thinking non-conceptually. Being is not a concept.
Not conceptually as in Descartes' concepts.
Non-conceptual. Descartes is also trying to get back to pre-predicative experience, but he comes back around.
Concepts meaning the things that are formed already in language that are in use.
No.
Meaning?
Concepts means that you see something around something. You have conceptualized. Conceptio. Septio is the Latinate, the suffix to seize something around. So if you say you perceive, you're seizing through, right? To conceptualize is to seize around something. So you're giving a form, right? And then you begin to think in concepts, right?
To give
in
form to
patterns.
something
Yes,
that you're
you're
trying to
giving more
understand.
form, but you're forming around. It's not only through your seeing or your perception that you're doing this. You're doing it in terms of, the writing of something that, a concept would be, the master. The master is not an intuition, it's a concept, right? The master and, the Neckschäften in German philosophy. Yeah?
Is it representational?
Yes, it becomes somewhat representational. Yes, it does. Yes.
So
yes.
this is where the
So the whole representational, conceptual thinking, and going back to what you said about Descartes is interesting because this would be we live in the age of the worldview, right? And the worldview, remember where we began this semester? Where if you can go back a little bit, 19 weeks. I thought it was only 15, but Rachel corrected me. The razor speaks today. Anyway, I'm really, I got it. Yeah. So, anyway, if you remember, where we started was the basic problems of phenomenology. We were looking at that, right? If you remember, and we also talked about the psychology of worldviews, how that wasn't enough, right? And that's in your first handout. That I gave you at the beginning of this, last, when was it, October of last year. I don't think I have a copy with me, but anyway, I may. But anyway, yeah, so this is where, yes, I do, yeah. Yeah, you can, if you go back to the basic problems of phenomenology, and this is worth, I think, rereading in the light of all the work we did, because I think this is going to give you, again, this is written during the same period. It's a course that he gave, if you remember, during the time of the. If you look at the 7th or 8th page in the basic problems of phenomenology, the introduction that I gave you, not the other handout of the structure of the text. But in this handout here, yeah, that I gave, you remember the basic problems? Yeah, I think I gave you, yeah. Didn't we all get this the first week? Yeah, no, I know. I'm just referring to it because he has a very good deconstruction, if you will, on the age of worldviews, right? And then he raises he speaks of this in the age of the world picture and how picture thinking also is part of representation. And people say, I got the picture,
right.
I got the sign, right? This is all part of the picture thinking. So this attack, if you will, I mean, it's very frontal in some ways to get back, right, to the septio, how something is seized in its beginning, right? Or griffen in how it's handled, grasped by the hand, is really what's going on in this return to the experience, and I emphasize this word too, experience of the things themselves. I emphasize this, right? That this is the pre-predicative experience, right? So he's trying to get back to this through being, which is both empty, right, and non-conceptual. And how do we get back? Who's our access through? Well, it's not through Sein, right? We're not top down here, right? Which is very interesting. It's not hierarchical, right? It's horizontal, if you remember, in the text of time. We enter into this realm through Dasein, therefore, ourselves, right? Ourselves and the things themselves, right? Now, of course, we know today that through Lacan and many others, even Freud before that the self is a kind of fiction. right? We know this, in a sense. And that the subject, in some ways, is a fiction. But Dasein, if we translate this more literally, and I think I pointed this out earlier on, one good starting point for reading Heidegger is to think of Dasein as the there-ness of being. There. It's a philosophy of orientation. It's a philosophy that orients us to the world, etc., in terms of our experiences, right, seen in the horizon of time. So it's through this that we're going to investigate everything. But before we go there, we want to begin to ask the question properly about being, right? Yeah. We've forgotten the question. We've forgotten to ask how to ask about the question, and we certainly have forgotten what it means to be. Now you can see out of this again, kind of, since a lot of today's hopefully summation, you can see out of this how the existentialist tradition takes it up. What does it mean to be? Right? What does it mean to be in a world? What does it mean to exist? What is it, if God is dead, is everything permitted? Right? What comes up with this? So we have many, many offshoots of this work of 1927. Again, the 1927, a crucial year of the putting together of all this. From this, we have the Christians who take up negative theology. So what if God is dead? We'll build a new religion around that to try to awaken the anticipation.
Nothing like
Right?
opportunism.
Yes, well, they're the best at it. That's why I'm always in the fix here. Yeah. I'm not the. I never learned that opportunism from the Christians, right? Yeah. Anyway, so then of course we had the Sartrean moment of the atheistic existentialism, right, in which God is dead and man is alive, and this, of course, also Alexander Kojève. We've talked about this over the multiple years, but these are the significant figures. Kojève's 1933 to 1939 lectures, tremendously influenced by Heidegger, especially the sections on being towards death and authenticity. And I don't know how many of you looked at the Kojève, the Introduction to the Reading of Hegel. This is one of the great works of philosophical commentary of the 20th century as well. It went on from 1933 to 1939, and it was transcribed by one of the students there, Raymond Queneau, and everybody attended. Everybody who was somebody. Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre, Georges Bataille, Michel Léry, Jacques Lacan. They're all present at these lectures for 6 years. And he went through everything, the idea of death in Hegel, the idea of, and this was year topics to these things. In guise of an introduction was the narrative of the proletariat in history. The narrative, really the struggle of master and slave, till the death was the struggle of capital and wage labor, or the proletariat and the bourgeois class, or the ruling class. All right, so anyway, so this book has a very long, it's kind of the father, if you will, that spawns, if you want to deal with today the itinerary of the sperm, Heidegger is seeding many levels. The dissemination is very active, right? And this is going on once again, and I'm doing a kind of historical narrative here about where it goes, at this, from here. Now, we also know that the book itself is incomplete. And I want to emphasize that again, that the 1929 lectures, Kant and the Problem of Metaphysics, is part of the second, a part of this, the book, right? As is and I brought it today, and I think Josh has it as well, on Time and Being, the 1962 lecture given in, I think this was given in Germany, in Bremen, yeah? In Bremen, I think, yeah, it was in Bremen, I think, on Time and Being, which is very, very interesting essay. I don't think that she says, but I think it was in Bremen in 62.
I heard that the translation was problematic for this one, that there were added paragraphs by the translator.
Yes,
That's terrible.
I know.
So it's almost like you can't read it.
Yes,
I mean,
it's
because you don't know
It's
if you're reading,
It's interesting though.
you know?
No, I know, but I mean, you know, again, the thought, right, is happening as well, right? I mean, this is what's going on.
Yeah.
The thought is still there. All right, so we have the 1929 Kant and the Problem of Metaphysics on time and being, and I was going to add, instead of only in the questions that you raised last week about Kant, are probably more interestingly raised, and also about Descartes. There's a wonderful section in a little book called What is a Thing? Was ist das Ding? Which I think is a more readable and more penetrating a commentary on Kant's Ding an sich, right? The thing in itself.
Okay, great.
Right? You have it
Yeah.
with you, or?
No,
Okay.
I'm gonna get it.
It's called, was ist
Little summer reading.
das Ding?
In the mountains of Jamaica. On the
Jamaica.
construction project.
You're going to hear Josh going, the thing is the thingin', the thing thingy. Rastafari. The thing is thingin', ding,
The
ding.
ting, the ting
Ding,
itself.
ding. That's what they actually in Putney Slope.
fucking hilarious.
You seen the movie Putney Slope? None of you, Robert Downey Sr.?
Yeah.
Great film. You guys got to see this. It's one of the most hilarious films. Very timely. Two very timely films this week. Doctor Strangelove with Bolton now in power and what they're going to be trying to do. And of course, Putney Slope was this wonderful, you know, black takeover of a Madison Avenue. Yeah, but there's a character who kind of plays like Allen Ginsberg outside the big the Seagram's building, and he keeps going, ding, ding, ding. You know, he's just chanting outside. You know, it's very funny. And they're all walking by, and you know, it's very, very good. You know, kind of out of the old Ginsberg howl. You know, and then the meditation. Anyway, I recommend this highly for people interested in this question. Again, of representational thinking and how it operates in Kant. Since last week we spoke about thinking that accompanies all representations.
Great.
Okay.
So conceptual thinking is also representational thinking.
Yes, I mean when you represent something, you're conceptualizing. You're not in a pure presentative mode, right? So yeah. Now we're going to talk about this a little bit next time with Marx. You know, I mean when we get into Marx a little bit and philosophy, that there's the method of presentation and the method of research that he goes through, and this is a very active thing in Marx. The Darstellung, you know, and remember in representation you always have a constellation, a Stellung, right? Something kind of that. Yeah. So Darstellung is presentation. Vorstellung is the Stella, configuration. So you have Vorstellung, Darstellung, and we'll talk more about this when we get to Marx. But I want to keep that term operative, representations, and also how it was used parenthetically, around it. There's a journal on the West Coast that comes out of Berkeley, representations, right? And what that really means, right, to these people. And of course, presence is in presentation, and as Derrida has tried to show, there's no such thing as pure presence. And that this was one of the attacks, if you will, or criticisms of Heidegger,
Sure.
which presence is never full. We will never have the full presence along the level of the interpretive model, and as you remember, the interpretive here is the hermeneutics, right, which is worked through by aletheia, right? Aletheia, right? Which uncovers, which discloses, undoes. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, what I tried to do, and again, I want to repeat this, and wait, I guess, well, anyway, he'll hear it. That the being in time is trying to address this aporia, that has occurred in Western philosophy. That there's the difficulty of passing through something, the point of undecidability, right, and how this ultimately is, not overcome fully. What do you need?
Oh, my pen kind of rolled into the
Yes,
Heidegger,
sir.
into the notes. It
Okay.
was absorbed by the
It was
notes.
absorbed by the notes. Good. Well, that's good. Notes is known to do that sometimes. Yeah, yeah. The absorbing. Okay, that's the next poem. All right.
Oh no! Oh no! He's just getting started. He's getting more mobilized to find it.
Yeah, wrong person to play with. Despite the Razor's comments.
I'm not trying to start.
I'm just
trouble
I'm
for
just
you.
yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
Just highlighting, you know.
Yes, I know. I understand, and I
You know,
very deeply
perspective.
appreciate it. Yes.
That's all.
Yeah. Anyway, so let me. I mean, this is what 1 week of workouts do to me. I can
Imagine
imagine
a
four,
sustain-
4 or
6
5 is
months.
sustained. I'm trying to kick up, man.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Why change ponies in midstream? Yeah. Right. Anyway. All right. So let's go back again. A crucial concept. I want to really for you to retain this is the Wiederholung, the repetition, right? In the strong sense of hauling along, yeah. And that this is one way that we basically rehearse, have this rehearsed conversation with the history of philosophy, with Plato and Aristotle, and because remember the whole book, and this is the Heidegger at work, is a meditation on this one section from the Sophist, right? The whole book. You see it, right? Sophist 244a. Yeah, why are you laughing?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Yes, right. The whole thing. And this is the sentence, right? And it's a pretty good translation from what I understand. My Greek is okay, but not that great. For manifestly, you have long been aware of what you mean when you use the expression being. We, however, who used to think we understood it, have now become perplexed, right? And the whole book is really about this question of our perplexity and how the repetition and the rewriting of ontology hopefully clears the ground so we can retrieve this, in an active way towards the future. Right? Completely, right?
So
Yeah.
Plato said
So
it's
first-
problematic.
Yes, a major problematic.
Yeah.
And he gave, by the way, there were 600 pages devoted to a reading of the Sophist that has been translated. His Heidegger's lectures just on the Sophist.
That's a good one.
But I also think that you should read, if you're going to read Heidegger's lectures, read the Sophist too.
Right.
Because it's an interpretation of an interpretation, and of a text, right? And so you always want to do that. And as Derrida has warned us, the text always hides from its first comer.
Yes. so
Good to
three
read
times.
twice, 2 or 3 times at least. Okay? So, anyway, the investigation begins, right? This investigation that Heidegger sets up, this task, etc., right? So, and as we said, he did not really overcome, this problem in this book, nor probably ever. And one of the reasons for the reversal, and I'm going to go there for a second, as I said, these are the highlights, if you will. 1933. (1933 to 1939) is Kojève's lectures. Right? On Hegel, but it's really Heidegger. It's interesting because if you really think about, again, I've done philosophy, for many years, but Kojève's Kant book is really his Hegel book. His Hegel book is really a combination of Marx and Heidegger. With Hegel, of course, and Kant, of course, the Kant book is Hegel and Kant, right? And you're going back, right? So this is a major moment from let's use 1927, what it unfolds on the left, right? On the left wing, we have the Kojève lectures. We have 1943, Being and Nothingness of Sartre. An essay in phenomenological ontology. a book that Sartre, in his radical Marxist, stance and turn, if you will, conversion in late 50s, says is a work of a bourgeois, not worth reading. This is what he said. Yeah, this is 750 pages of pretty good philosophical competency. And I suggest, and what the intention by Sartre was to work out what Heidegger left completely unarticulated, the Mid-Sein, the being with others. The being with others. Right? And any notion of collectivity, any notion of, the building of community. So, right? So this is what he does, and the section listen, I think at this stage, in all of our lives, you want to read maybe the seminal chapters or the chapters that are of the greatest interest, after time. And to go through 750 pages of Sartre's being in nothingness is a little bit too much, to go through. Yeah, what were we going to say? Yeah.
So being in time is radical individualism.
Well, I don't know if you really use the word individualism. I guess you could use radical subjectivity.
Okay.
I think the individualism is something we have in the United States.
Right.
And we use this out of the social Darwinist moment. We use this out of the 19th century, American scholar, Emerson, these kind of terms. And then we come into the 20th century with this individualistic ethos all the time. I think he's talking about a kind of subjectivity,
There is no individual
Yeah?
for Heidegger.
No.
The self that way
Doesn't exist.
There is no individual.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
The subject
And in
is
Sartre, it's a
project.
more Hegelian construct that you're for self, pour soi, and this is in a dialectical tension with the en soi. Right? And these tensions are always going on between subjectivity and objectivity. This is Sartre's way of looking at the subject-object, right? And once you overcome, he used to define love as two hypnotists in a room going at each other. And this was the pour soi, en soi, right? One becomes objectified, then the other becomes objectified, and then you become the object itself. Which is a very Oriental notion, where you become fully the object, right? And then from there, you begin to think through, the there-ness of the being. It's kind of interesting. You begin to reorient, in a way. Yeah? Now, anyway, okay, so this is going on in 43, this pour soi, en soi, the filling out of the concrete relations with others, the notion of bad faith, terms such as authenticity and inauthenticity in Heidegger become re-articulated by Sartre as bon foi, and mauvaise foi. Excuse me. Okay. So he goes good, bad faith, and he uses examples of the waiter in the cafe. He also has examples of the woman in the back seat of a car, being, kind of touched, and, her, this is all, yeah, it's true, but this is what he does. I'm just repeating what's in the
It just
text.
sounds like from another world, given, of course, the world that we live in.
It is another
These
world.
questions-
Yes. Well, I mean, we don't really write this way anymore about phenomena.
We have
Everything
doodle
in
dolls.
terms of we don't really say, we don't really take a step back, to the point of where we can really look at descriptive phenomena, the description of phenomena. The region that I had up here earlier, the prepredicative, that both Husserl and Heidegger are trying to get to through different means, is an attempt to describe the thing itself, right? Is an attempt to get to the actual phenomena. What's shining forth, what's coming, what's phenomenalizing. We used form earlier, but it's really what shows itself, what appears, this phenomenalization, etc. So they're always trying to go back to this pre-predicative experience, and the first step is towards description. And we have very little of this today, because everything's either you're correct, the language you use, or whatever. It's a completely destroyed thought. And in my view, and also in terms of what,
Yeah. I reread some Zizek thing on political correctness recently that was, I thought, very accurate, actually.
Uh-huh.
And in that, by being politically correct, you also enable the basically inherent racism, or you know, whatever the opposite of these terms designate, actually.
Right.
You know? I mean, simple premise, but very, very true still. I mean, this was years ago they wrote that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Multiculturalism.
Yeah.
It's a new kind of racism. Melting pot was a racism, still is,
Mhm.
you know, for the immigrant population. You think about these terms that are using. Are you cooking me, huh? Putting me in the melting pot.
Or if you
So that I
if
can
you
be
fight
melted into a homogeneous subject.
or nothing,
It's
just soup.
Americanization or just soup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Homogeneity.
Think about, think about
Exactly.
these things.
And
The-
also
the use
social
of these-
justice.
The use of this sociological language, social justice.
Can't
What the hell
stand
does
that.
that mean?
What does that mean? Social justice.
Yeah.
That means to get your own pie.
Yes, of course, a piece of the
So it's
pie.
it's a distributive kind of. Here's your little piece.
Right, exactly. But what I want you to recognize here again, this phenomena, you know, this phenomenology, transcendental, and I remember I talked a little bit about transcendental phenomenology and hermeneutical phenomenology and the difference between the Husserlian approach towards the description of the phenomena itself and the reduction, right, and the suspension of our natural standpoints, called the epoche. And this is what Stiegler, I mean, I have some different takes on Stiegler.
What is it? Suspension of our natural.
Our natural standpoint. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So when we discuss here, you know, my little, quote, love affair, right, so to speak, right? This is natural standpoints at work. We need to suspend that to understand it in terms of different layers, right? This is the way the phenomenologist would go about it, right? To understand it in a different kind of layers instead of the natural viewpoint, right? And it's been the pattern that or something like that. The phenomenologist wants to stop that, wants to get back again to the things itself. What layers are playing? What are the complexities in that? How do we get to this matter, to the thing itself? Yeah. So once you get there, you know, in these reductions, you begin your descriptions. Cancer is this. This form of cancer is this. This is how it metastasizes, but it becomes a descriptive language because you've learned more about, right, the phenomena of which you attach a name to, that you've given a, you know, conceptual network to, and you're able to, you know, then begin to investigate, right, without prejudice. This is what it's trying to do. It's trying to take away prejudgment, right, presumptions, if you will, in knowledge. All of these things are operative.
Concepts, yeah.
Yeah,
representation.
and why you have the concept of social justice, as Arto was saying, or melting pot, right? Well, how do these concepts come to be? What are they reflecting upon, and what are they actually, you know, moving towards in the social world? And I think Zizek and some others are very good on this,
Yeah.
in terms of how political correctness has been a weapon in the hands of the right.
Yeah.
And the more and more we get about this, the more and more the right populism is going to emerge. It might not take the form of Trump next time around, but it'll take another kind of form. And most of my friends who are Jewish, not practicing Jews, are very scared about the levels of rising Semitism in the United States right now, you know, and globally, you know, because what they see is another kind of, you know, moment here of it's repeating something from the past, very attuned to it.
The problem is this
Yeah,
time
go-
there is no left oppositional superpower.
No, there's no
that can,
left
that
at
can
all.
fight the war and defeat them.
No, that's true.
That's the problem.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, maybe China and Russia
Maybe
can,
China and
but
Russia.
the problem with that is they're no longer left governments,
Right.
and they have no understanding. I mean, it's more of a movement, much more towards a Nietzschean world politics, a kind of combination of Machiavellian Nietzschean world politics than the old 1917 to 68 moment, and we have to take that into account. I think this is very crucial for our own, you know, sanity, our own ability to reason, our ability to see what's coming down. Because if we're always stuck within the old language of the struggle between, you know, proletariat and bourgeoisie, or we're in these kind of moments of the agent of history is thus and thus, etc. I think we're going to really miss a lot of what's going on in this age of financialization. And, we're on the cusp too. We've talked about this as well. The epoche is the suspension, but also, and what Arto was talking about before people came today, section 75 on the philosophy of history. Heidegger is trying to write an epochal history, and if you remember, I think it was 3 weeks ago, I tried to have this dialogue between Nietzsche and Heidegger, in terms of Nietzsche's the uses and the abuses of history, and Heidegger's notion of future historicity, or the future as having beenness, right?
Yeah.
Projected forward, and within that is your anticipated resoluteness, your anticipated, certainty for the future, or your anticipated opening towards the future. And this is something that most people don't have. So the entire security state, the state of security where everything is planned out to your pension, to your, your Social Security, et cetera, all of these things, is an example of a kind of inauthentic projection, right? In which, contingency is taken away in the name of the security, right? In the sense. It's the taming of chance, which is a 19th century notion.
Yeah.
Right? How do you tame chance in this sense? And, for Heidegger, this, to him, does not allow us to live in that kind of, I'm not saying this is right, please don't hear me this way, but I think it's powerful in terms of how you think about things, that if you're living in this anticipated resoluteness, you understand the certain inauthenticity of your having beenness, and this is what change is really about. How do you take the having beenness of the inauthentic and transform that into some kind of anticipatory resoluteness towards the future? And this is what, we're writing now, this Techniques of Servitude, which I'm trying to elaborate in the chapter, the first chapter called The Archaeology of a Failure. And that failure is our long march through the institutions, our long failures with protest and resistance, that we have not been able to overcome these kind of technical and these kind of strategies. And I'm open to criticism on this, but I don't really think the Zapatistas have done really, dent the Mexican machine, ultimately. It was a nice moment, right? And it was different, and it's worthy of holding up as a symbol of Comandante Marcos, in a sense. But on another level, does this really anticipate a new politics that can be, a force? Politics is force. And you would know better than me with your background in Latin America. I'm not, I'm speaking somewhat from the position of not a Eurocentrism, but most of the ideas are coming out of this period, right?
Yeah.
From the 19th century on. Yeah.
The real thing with the Zapatistas is they decided that they were going to limit it to their area,
Yes. No, I understand that.
And there are movements now actually coming out of there are indigenous groups in Oaxaca that
Right.
are talking about using the same kind of community power and expanding it, throughout Mexico,
Okay.
which could be
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. To the Heideggerian and to the second and third generation Heideggerians, including the Derridians, the real question is then what constitutes a community?
Sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
and what does that really mean in a way? I personally, in discussions with Arto, and I certainly, we've been hinted at it here, is this community of the floating hierarchies and jazz, in some ways as a kind of opening towards an autonomous existence. I also think that Jean Genet's notion of community, which was totally anti-bourgeois, was the community of artists, writers. This was really the community, to come.
And then what is required
Yeah.
to function in a community like
Right.
that, right?
Right.
Like the education, whatever it is.
Yes,
like,
of course. I mean, how
socialization
do
of a
you
certain
build?
kind.
How do you build? I mean, one of the projects of the Institute of the Radical
Because
Imagination.
by default, you
would
can't
be- yeah.
participate in the floating hierarchy just by, you're right, it requires some prerequisites. perhaps.
Sure.
Yes, of course. No, you need education in that
Yeah.
direction. Yes, you need to
Yeah.
completely shift the educational system from one of the race to the top, which is really the race to the bottom, hierarchization, teaching to the test, all of these things that really take away horizontal thinking. It really becomes just kind of verticality, and very little of the horizon is really seen. There's no interconnections going on anymore between disciplines. Yeah, yeah. I mean, people forget how determinate language is. When we speak to doctors, we speak the language of medicine. When we speak to physicists, we speak the language of physics. This is determinate. And, there's some kind of deconstructive maneuver. He's very good on this. I mean, again, I think it's worth rereading in terms of language, that sections, on idle talk, curiosity, discourse, ambiguity, fallenness, the addictogenic.
Yeah, this is their manifesto.
Who's that? Oh, the Oaxaca, the
Oaxacan.
Sandinista? Oh, the new Oaxaca. Oh, you
Yeah.
got their manifesto.
Consejo de Defensa de los Derechos del Pueblo.
Yeah, the national movement of the popular,
Yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting.
Yeah,
Look
yeah.
at it.
Yeah, I will.
Philip
Yeah,
has the
yeah, of course.
manifestos right.
We're all writing manifestos,
Manifestos.
yeah.
He's a machine,
Well, I'm
He
still
never
trying to
said
figure out
which one
what
you need.
Yeah,
which one you need, like,
where they're going,
Phil's
He's always got the
all got the latest
latest
editions.
This
That's
is
good.
the latest.
Yeah.
This is
Oh,
2010.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
Get your latest manifesto.
That's Stiegler's latest manifesto too, was 2010. Yeah, I'm trying to rewrite the Fifth Situations manifesto. That was
We're encountering a lot of
2005.
inauthentic-
We have infantile tendencies
Yeah.
in the
Towards
group.
death.
Very infantile
Including the bounce
tendency.
check.
Bounce check is one indication of that infantile. It will not like it was $5,000, $200. In this day and age, I bounced a couple of checks at Christini's back in the day, and then they called me up. I said, I don't give money to that big fat Greek, and anyway, they try to come after me. You could used to, if you needed cash, you could go to the Upper East Side Christini's and write a personal check. So I used to kite checks there, back when I, didn't have much coming in. Right. So anyway, all right. Let me go back to this historically. No, this is good. We have these, short digressions. So this is what's going into World War II, for example. Okay, and I'm starting to do this in my philosophy class. Share this with you. I read Kant now with my students on the what is enlightenment. And the definition of enlightenment. And enlightenment, going back to a concept that Arto was using and we were talking about earlier, autonomy. Enlightenment is really the drive towards autonomy, right? And this is what it really ultimately is, that your emergence from your self-incurred slavery or immaturity. And this plays out also in Stiegler's states of shock. If some of you remember when we talked about this, the immaturity, that he looks at in today's world and what's going on. So this becomes an active concept and an active motion, realizable only by freedom. But for Kant, freedom is to use reason in a public space. In other words, to write. That's what freedom is, to write, for Kant. This is the main principle of the Aufklärung, the freedom to write. And in that freedom to write, one becomes, an enlightened person. And for Kant, we live in an age of enlightenment, but not yet in an enlightened age. All right? So from there, going back to World War II, what happens is, I think, in a lot of ways, and we know this from colonial studies and, studies in slavery, etc., is that this notion of freedom and autonomy only belongs to the Western European or the Europa-America mind, right? It does not belong to the colonies, right? So of course, after World War II, we get all these, national liberation struggles. You remember 45 in Algeria, I think there were 250,000 people killed in terms of the early uprisings. The FLN, to the best of my knowledge, is not created till 1954, right? We have the same thing in Egypt with Nasser, this drive for autonomy. Of course, Pakistan splitting off from India, right? We have all these new nation states. And of course, the liberation struggles in the Pan-African movements and in the Caribbean, right, as well, of which, of course, Cuba being the greatest successful example. So this, in a way, Fanon was certainly influenced by this, and certainly influenced by 1927 in terms of existentialism or philosophies of existence a la Heidegger and Jaspers, becomes one of the chief thinkers of the new kind of undermining, if you will, of Eurocentric or Western European and Euro-American kind of thinking, right? With the wretched of the earth, black skin, white masks, right? Okay, you guys, know all this, right? And Albert Memmi, the colonizer and the colonized, these texts, the dominated man, all of these things become active, so you of course have Nkumbra, Lumumba, Julius Nyerere, all working, right? And of course, as Josh knows very well, probably still having bad dreams, 1970,
Especially now.
All the
Burn,
time.
right? All the time,
Especially
yeah.
now.
Who?
Josh,
Burn.
we saw Burn, the film
Oh,
Burn
Burn.
with
Have you seen
Marlon
Burn?
Brando.
About what? Is it the one about Haiti or?
It's
Well,
like
it's,
a-
it's set sort of post Santo Domingo uprising.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's
Oh,
great.
yeah, it's wonderful.
I'm showing it in
Yeah,
class on
I
Tuesday.
came out.
Queimada, yeah.
Quemada.
It's an amazing film.
Professor, it's also called Quemada.
And he says great things about freedom in it, actually.
Yes. So,
Good
so
critique
this
of freedom.
becomes a very different notion of just the freedom to use one's pen in the public space. And Kant, in a way, was the advent, if you will, of a kind of liberal left mentality, right? Even though I think he was very correct. You cannot just have a socio-political revolution, you need a revolution in thinking. Because the same, and I think Heidegger comes out of this, going back to conservative revolution, the same is operative in terms of, when you have a revolution and it's only politically and economic and not in thinking itself, right? The same patterns will repeat themselves. And this was also Althusser, to a degree, when he said that, when Althusser said he is going to, that ideology is eternal. There will be ideology after the revolution.
I have
No,
I have the
ideology.
quote that Heidegger said that I think you referred to.
Oh, good, okay,
From
that's from
Schumann.
Heidegger? Oh, you quote Schumann on that? Okay.
This is from The Turning.
Yes.
So Heidegger said about this.
Yeah, well, I was gonna get to the turning here, because
Oh.
when these are all going on, but go ahead, please.
No, but this
you
is the quote I
anticipate,
think
right?
that he's
The next
thinking
big
Kant
year.
here. He's thinking
Right.
Kant here, this thing.
Yes.
Enlightenment. So Heidegger said, prior to the question that alone always seems to be the most immediate and urgent, the question of what ought we to do, we must ponder this: how must we think? Thinking is indeed the proper acting insofar as the act means to comply with the essential unfolding of being. This original correspondence, carried out for its own sake, is thinking.
Yes,
So the thinking comes
Acting.
first, before the writing and before the action.
yes,
You know? So that's like that's a connection with Kant, essentially, an amplification of
absolutely,
Interesting.
absolutely. And this is why it's so crucial to go back
Yeah.
to this representational thinking and continually deconstruct it in terms of this age of the world picture, this age of psychology of the world views. Because for Heidegger in 1947, which is when the letter in humanism, which I think some people heard, David and Phil and Bob were certainly there, I think Sean too, when we did letter on humanism about 3 years ago. We did the close reading of that. We talked about phenomenology. You remember this? We did phenomenology as rigorous science. You had good questions how Husserlian phenomenology sounds the same as Hegelian phenomenology. I have a very good memory.
It feels like
Yeah, anyway, and we did letter on humanism. I mean, you don't really remember so well.
What course was it?
Look,
I thought it was the post-structuralism we did that in.
Well, we did it in post-structuralism
Yeah, we
as
did.
well, but we did it even before
We
that.
did that before that.
Yes, yes. But I mean, it's a great text, right?
Yeah.
It is a response at one level to Sartre's existentialism as humanism. It's a taking apart of Western humanism, which of course he understands vis-a-vis not through the liberation struggles, but he understood where it led. And it's a byproduct of the metaphysical tradition, right? In some ways. You know, one of the great, by the way, novellas about this whole decolonizing of philosophical conceptualization and the Enlightenment is Melville's Benito Cereno.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful novella.
Fantastic.
One of the most beautifully written pieces of fiction in the Western world. In my completely under talked about, never really on syllabuses. You always read Billy Budd, which is phenomenal too, you know. But Benito Cereno something. You know, the trilogy would be from that period: Bartleby, Benito Cereno, and Billy Budd. You know, the Crisis and the Republic. Yes, right, right. Yeah, and I mean, that's another thing. We should have a course on Melville. We really should. Melville is very, very important. You know, and of course, C.L.R. James, you know, wrote this great book on the Mariners and the Renegades. And you know, and yeah. And Dirk Struett on the whaling industry, by the way, in Massachusetts, the Marxist mathematician. So anyway, going back to this, so Heidegger in 47 writes the letter on humanism, and this represents what Arto just read from, the turning, right? The turning of Heidegger, the Kehre, das Kehre, the turn.
Did he call that himself? He called
He
it the
did. He
turn?
ultimately called that, but some people read Letter on Humanism. I don't. Some people read it as an apology, in the Platonic sense. You know, that he's really trying to be, you know, cute with philosophy. I apologize for my associations during the war. You know, he was also wrote this when he was still part of the denazification. He couldn't teach. You know, Heidegger was not allowed to teach by the New Germany for a while. You know, I think I told you this famous story of Hannah Arendt after she did Eichmann in Jerusalem. You know that she was ostracized and criticized heavily by the Jewish community. So Irving Howe was at a cocktail
You
party.
can see why she was, you
Yeah.
know,
Yes.
especially these days.
Yes, right. So Irving Howe was at a cocktail party with her 2 years after the book's written, and goes up to her. I want to apologize on behalf of my people. I want to apologize
Behalf
on
of my
behalf
people.
of the Social Democrats or our people. He may have said our, but anyway, he puts himself up as the apologist for, you know. And I want to. She looks at him. Doesn't say anything. She used to smoke Pall Mall cigarettes, very long ashes. She flicks the ash on his coat, turns away, walks away.
She was not a victim.
Never was a victim. Tough
As a
cookie,
woman,
man.
she was not
Well,
a
Tough
yeah, I
cookie.
mean, if you read Eichmann in Jerusalem, she's
Right,
definitely
right,
not a,
right, right.
not a victim.
Right.
Very perceptive.
Right. So anyway, so the 47 was the beginning of the turn. You know, he did some seminars, and we know the 62. You know, the essay. You know, these talks that he gave that are in this collection here, as well as the Heraclitus seminar and a few other things. You know, most of the stuff that's coming out now are his lectures. Right? There are over 100 volumes of Heidegger's collected lectures. You know, that are pretty amazing, you know, but once you get the drift, I think they get, you know, easier to read, etc. So 47, this is going on in, you know, the philosophical world against Western metaphysics, etc. And as most of you know, because we did this last semester, the beginning of the ends of man, the ends of the philosophical anthropologist, Alexander Kojève and Jean-Paul Sartre, right? The end of this kind of humanistic anthropology and philosophical anthropology, and the attempt to continually be engaged in a relentless destruction of Western metaphysics. Relentless. So, you know how Marx says, I'm a relentless critique of everything existing. For Heidegger, it's a relentless critique and destruction of Western metaphysics. right? And that means a destruction and an examination of principles, right? The meta, the principles of the physics, or the beyond, and the beneath. All of these things are being looked at simultaneously by him, etc. at this point. So this letter on humanism opens up another kind of moment in France, right? That is, partially Jacques Derrida, and another level, Michel Foucault. This is the influence, I'm doing a kind of anxiety of influence here and how these things go differently. So Derrida, for example, and Foucault in a different way, take seriously, unlike these two monsters, and literally monsters in the good sense, in my opinion, but these were, tough cookie, again, tough individuals, if you will, or subjectivities, right? That they come in and they start wanting to talk about language. They want to investigate the hermeneutical term. They want to investigate, language as determinate. Mm-hmm. And Derrida begins to see this, right? Early on in the book called Rhematology, right? This is his fundamental shift in terms of, a new way of thinking. And what happens with the destruction of metaphysics and the change of the epoch? We are now in the epoch of cybernetics, like it or not. I don't especially like it, all this digitalization and the determinations by digital technologies, etc. But we are definitely in this epoch of the cybernetic. Right? Communication theory, communications is going on in every field, everywhere, and infrastructure, as we know, as I was told earlier. What was it, simulacra on the Apple computer? Don't touch.
The button is not, there's no button,
Yeah.
but you think you're
That's why
pushing a
there's
button.
no good sex anymore. You just, simulacra.
It's true.
Don't
You put the
touch.
virtual
Right,
over
the
the.
virtual.
It's a fake button now.
The first.
It's literally, it's just a piece of glass. It doesn't move. But when you
So-
press it, you feel like you're moving.
Oh, it clicks, oh.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's virtual, but,
Okay, so this is what Heidegger sees, in the interview. I think some of you have read it, Only a God Can Save Us Now. He speaks to this. This, of course, the cybernetic is taken up by Lyotard in The Postmodern Condition in 1979, which is a report to knowledge to the province of Quebec. 1979. Apart from my other escapades in Montreal, I had dinner with a person that was on the panel with Lyotard when he gave the first presentation of postmodernism in Montreal in 1980. We didn't get this book in English till 1984. So the postmodern condition. And you remember we read What is Postmodernism last time, last semester. 25 odd weeks ago.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
He
I'm
remembers
sorry.
the weeks.
Yeah, I do. Now, yeah. Datability. Yeah, I know Heidegger's against this datability, but anyway. All right, so again, this is where it leads, right? No longer is it the question of being, right, or the meaning of being. These are no longer the questions that preoccupy him. And if you want to do this like some people do with Wittgenstein, Heidegger 1 and Heidegger 2, Wittgenstein 1 and 2, the Heidegger of being and time and the philosophy of subjectivity, and then the Heidegger of the turn, 1947. Okay? Again, simultaneously, if you can do the parallelism in the movie, or kind of even jump cut,
Interesting.
parallel to this, Fanon and company, the Negritude movement, of course, César and Leopold Senghor. All of these moments are happening. The surrealists, right, are going on particularly in North Africa, West Africa, right, in liberation struggles throughout the world. Somewhat in the Caribbean, depends on where in the Caribbean, but this is another movement that is happening, right? And I know you've seen the film and it's fresh in your mind, and it's such a good film for this thinking, is that basically Jose Dolores, who's the hero of Burn. Have some people seen Quemada, the Guillo Pontecorva film Burn with Marlon Brando?
Talked about, yeah.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we were just discussing. Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah,
Several
but
times.
yeah, right.
I have a copy of the DVD.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you ever want to
Yeah, no, I do too. I'm showing it Tuesday if anybody has,
I want to like hand them out.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like a movie you want to hand out, like just have.
Oh, it's a
Have 'em
handout.
on,
Here,
have
kids.
'em
Yeah, that's
available.
good. Yeah, the DVD. I like that. That's good. But anyway, in that
We're in the
film,
era of
you begin
cybernetics,
to
you
you
know.
begin
Yeah,
to
yeah.
see the
Why not?
chipping away at the Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah.
You begin to see the chipping away by the revolutionary unstrata, because each sequence is unfolding into another sequence of a higher level of consciousness. And it's a very, I mean, to me, it's the greatest filmic version, if you will, of the master-slave consciousness. I mean, it's just brilliant this way, well, how dialectical this film is. Each time that Brando sets him up, each time he is inframed, if you will, in a Heideggerian language, each time there's a thesis and or a position and counterposition going on, he grows more into the role of the revolutionary that is going to go completely against the Western notions of autonomy and freedom and think this in a very different way. Right?
But also,
And when Fanon says everywhere Western man goes, they speak of enlightenment and bringing knowledge, but everywhere they go, they kill people.
It's true. It's so true.
And then this point about the Enlightenment too. First, he's there for the state, and then he's there for the company, the sugar cane.
The Royal Sugar,
Yeah.
Royal Sugar Company.
There to kill the
Gentlemen, you
revolution.
ask who
Yeah.
I am and what role I play and who I'm
Yeah.
employed by. I am currently employed by the Royal Sugar Company.
So-
That's when he goes back. Originally, he's
Yeah.
employed by Her Majesty.
The reversal of enlightenment.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Well, it's a reversal of the state
Yeah.
to what the state's really run by,
Right.
the Royal Sugar Company. It's very, very, very beautifully constructed.
yeah, and he.
Masterpiece.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Brando also changes too, though. I mean, as well as,
At the end, right?
towards the end. I mean, he becomes subordinate to what's his name again?
Jose Dolores.
Dolores. I mean, he's looking for him in the crowd. Almost desperate.
You mean the last sequence?
Yes.
At the last scene, but
Yeah.
gradually he's also changing, and he's the master-slave dynamic.
Well, the interesting thing about him is that he ends up not going back to work for the state, but he ends up as a kind of Bowery bum, in London, where he's just doing fistfights, to make a living in these, brawling beer clubs or whatever they were called in London during that period. And then he's brought back, the only man who knows Jose Dolores well enough. Yes, I know, did you say Kamada? And he wipes his scar. I remember the gestures, right? And, and he's kind of taken in by this. Now, of course, one reading of the film is the level of the homoeroticism that's going on. I mean, that goes without,
But I
without
think
saying.
I think to your point though, when
on
he's
the
killed,
white horse.
No, but
Put him
the-
on the white horse.
Yeah,
The symbols are very interesting.
spoiler warning to get over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They scale
Well, it's
it.
like an old movie.
Yeah, it's an old.
Spoiled
but,
already.
Which
yeah,
one?
But he's.
The movie.
Oh, for Arto?
Yeah.
Well,
No,
have
I've
you
seen it. I've seen
Oh,
it.
you've seen
Yeah,
it.
I just
Yeah.
remember.
Well,
I
we're
forgot
When he's
the-
killed, though.
I forgot the
This
title.
This is
but it's-
repetition
yeah.
Yeah.
at work.
Yeah, in the end, he's searching for
Yeah.
the Lord, and then
Yeah.
thinks he finds him, and it turns out to be
Happy.
somebody
Well,
else.
because it's the master slave. He can't
He can't-
fulfill himself without the slave. And once the
Yeah.
slave is gone, then
Right,
then he has to
he's
die.
becoming,
Yeah.
positions have changed,
Right.
and then this person who
Yeah.
we don't know, but who seems to have inherited Dolores' spirit because he then killed.
We don't die, we multiply.
Yeah, right.
It's kind of amazing for Pontecorvo, these masters. Very few films, but each film is a profound
5 films.
It's incredible.
And
It's
three,
incredible.
3 I know are masterpieces.
Incredible.
Yeah.
What's the
Capo. Susan Strasberg is a
Capo.
Jewish woman
Yeah.
who becomes a capo at a camp.
Oh my God. Incredible.
Then, of course, Battle of Algiers.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
Burn.
Burn. And then he did a film on state terrorism that never made it to the United States. I think it was suppressed. I don't think it got in. I think there were some people that tried to get it in underground, right? Yeah. No, I was in Baltimore when Realm of the Senses. There was actually a censorship ban put on
Realm of the
showing Realms of the
Senses.
Senses in 1976 at the Charles Theater. and John Waters was out there. There was a letter from Lacan. Yeah, it was very funny. Very funny. This needs to be seen. They were really getting it on charge. The quote obscene laws and all this. Not an obscene, very beautiful film. Very beautiful. Yeah, it's Oshima. Yeah, beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous film. I mean, in my yeah.
Like Spinoza, only 3 books, but that's enough.
He didn't write it when he was alive. Only one was
Only
published.
one was published. That's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough.
Yeah, of course. Listen, if you can write one Beyond Good and Evil like Nietzsche or one Twilight of the Idols, more power to you.
Yeah.
And this academic reproduction is pretty hard to take too. Yeah. So anyway, going back to this, so you can read this kind of parallel movement that we're always caught. I mean, our tension, and I'm going to talk about this when we do Marx a little bit, is we're always in these oscillating tendencies, right? Because at the one hand, we're deeply indebted to this thinking of the Greco-Roman moment, right? On another hand, you speak of the indigenous, or we speak of, the African, so to speak, right? They do not grow up with the symbols that the Eurocentric West does. So when Fanon says, or Sartre begins his great introduction, I recommend reading that, the Wretched to the Earth, Parthenon. These words mean nothing to the colonized. You understand? So this is what we're about, and then I would also add to this, and I mean, look, I haven't, personally I haven't theorized this, but I think that there's a lot here intuitively that we could do. May Day speech of Genet, Jean Genet at Yale, 1970 May Day speech, kind of problematizes this with language, and then you see a group of writers, particularly Pierre Guillotin in French, who's Arabic French, right, is deconstructing the French language in terms of its colonialism. So for a lot of people, all this makes no sense, right? But to someone that's thinking through things like this, they begin to understand what the textual movement and investigation is. Simultaneously, Derrida, does an experiment called Glas in 1975, for whom the bell tolls is the Glas, the bell tolls for something, right? And, this is a risk with Genet as being, educated by only public assistance, no real institutions except that of public assistance, no educational institutions, etc. And he risks Genet's writing and his thinking against the state, Hegel's version of the state. So you have 2 columns, the Genet column, and what is the language of public assistance, and how he's an orphan. I like the term orphan consciousness. I like 2 terms about consciousness. Bastard consciousness means you've, overcome the father and you've really become the bastard, right, in a way, and you're setting on a new path. And the orphan consciousness is really, to me, a kind of notion of radical innocence. And, this is me
Ideologically
speaking.
not polluted.
Yeah. So you have 2 times, like I said, you have the bastard, right? Right, and then you have the bastard, and then the one that's not ideological produces a kind of radical innocence. The universe becomes the child at play again. I use the word orphaned. So the 2 forms of consciousness in terms of this upsurge, parallel to, post-World War II, domination, And in a way, there's of course another level to this, just for us to think about. We're not going to be able to do this today, or without a whole research team. But you get the, the codification of terms, CIA, disinformation, all these kind of things that are playing out. Where all of a sudden in 1979, the word, freedom fighter is basically a reactionary.
Sure.
Yeah, the Contras.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Contras become freedom
When
fighters.
the founding fathers,
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
of course, the freedom fighters.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we begin to have these kind of shifts in linguistic signifiers that produce a kind of new vocabulary in which people speak in, which again, going back to the 27 Heidegger, take away from the meaning of to be, right? You know, go back to this kind of attempted material etymology.
Didn't the freedom fighter term originate with the Hungarian Revolution?
In 56,
Yeah.
yes.
Which was also problematic,
It was very
because
problematic.
a lot of them were fascists,
Well,
and
you know, you
Nazis.
remember we grew up, we had those stupid commercials with the, late at night with the steel, clowns around people's head. The mine's a terrible thing to waste. You know, give money to, what was it, UNICEF or some nonsense, I forgot what it was. Save the,
United Negro College.
United, well, that was another one.
Yeah.
But no, but the mind is a terrible thing to waste was an attack first on the communist Eastern Bloc.
Oh, really?
Yes, Eastern Bloc,
I did not,
yes. Yeah.
oh, Madison Avenue was busy.
Oh, yes, no, Bernays was always thinking this through, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyways, Bernays, you know, and his group, all those psychoanalysts around him too. I mean, that's another book that really needs to be written, that nobody's really done a great, I mean, there are hints at it, but, you know, to think about the role that psychoanalysis played in the construction of this, you know, domination that is going on in everyday life. You know, how much psychoanalysis played into this, especially ego psychology. You know, going back to the individualism, you know, the ego psychology of the big three, Kreis, Lowenstein, and Heinz Hartmann. Yeah, Lowenstein was Lacan's analyst, by the way. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Are there any sort of published attempts to analyze
Well,
psychoanalysis?
yes, I
Madison
mean,
Avenue,
sure, I
and
mean,
that kind of
Eros and
stuff?
Civilization and Life Against Death are the two great meta works. Of course, the repression of psychoanalysis by Russell Jacoby on Arnold Fenichel, you know, who was, I think, Marilyn Monroe's psychoanalyst, you know, yeah.
Can't win them all.
You can't win, that one he didn't win, that's true, yeah.
But she was very interesting, Marilyn Monroe. Like,
Oh, yeah.
she read a lot. She traveled with massive suitcases filled with books and like politically kind of. I mean, she was not just like.
Yeah, you saw Rebecca's piece on her mother and her father, Rebecca Miller, in the Times. She's going back. She's doing a documentary on her father, Arthur Miller, and her, you know, her famous photographer, Swedish photographer mother. But how Marilyn, when she was growing up, was in the household. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And she's got a memoir she's doing. This is on Netflix or HBO. I'm not sure. You know. But I mean, I don't know how
It's also
good
fun
it
to
is.
read.
Because I gave Rebecca, I mean, this is, again, a very old story, but she used to go out with a friend of mine. You know, we go visit down a place in the Little Italy. She had a place on, I think it was on Mercer Street. Can't remember exactly. One of the three streets before you get to the Bowery. Anyway, I gave her a copy of The Kino Eye, which is a great classic in Russian cinema. She didn't know anything about this. You know, it was kind of interesting. You know? Yeah.
Marilyn Monroe, you mean?
No, that's not. No, I don't
Oh.
mean Marilyn. This is Arthur Miller's daughter. No,
Oh, yeah.
no, I was a little bit too young to
Yeah.
meet Marilyn. Yeah, then we could really talk about time travel and
You can read her
what kind of
FBI
good
file.
shape I'm in,
Her
despite the
FBI
Marine.
file is incredible to read.
Yes, of course.
It's been
Yes,
declassified.
I know.
or, you know.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
She met in Mexico City with known members of the Communist Party of Mexico, and they discussed the relationship with the president and situation in Cuba. You know, like that's what Marilyn was doing in Mexico City.
Well, they did the same thing to Gene Seberg. I mean, a good study would be a comparative study, even though Seberg was never, quote, a sex symbol. She was certainly a very wanted entity as a political, yeah.
Yeah, she's well known. I think she's
Seberg or Monroe?
Seberg from
No.
in Kansas, where I think she grew up in a
Yeah.
rural area or something.
Yeah, New York Herald Tribune. That's what she does in Breathless. That made her career.
Oh, right,
That
right.
great sequence on the, you know,
But,
Rue Saint-Germain. Yeah.
she was kind of a role model, you know, the local Kansas gal.
Yeah,
who
of course.
was good in
Yeah.
French cinema.
Yeah, does better than Dorothy.
Right.
Yeah, better than
We're
Dorothy.
not in Kansas
Jane
anymore.
Fonda with Roger Vadim, right? You had Seberg with Godard and Jane Fonda with Roger Vadim. Barbarella, that was Jane Fonda's early stuff. No, etc.
Yeah. There's another, speaking about psychoanalysis.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's some other
and
works, yeah,
public
obviously, yeah,
relations,
yeah.
you know, the history of the Bernays, a book I'm trying to remember, I think it's called.
Captains of Consciousness by Stuart Ewan.
Deconstructing psychiatry or psychoanalysis, deconstructing America, I think it's called.
Okay.
And I can't, the author doesn't, I have the book.
Uh-huh.
The author doesn't
Interesting.
have
Well,
it.
yeah, look for it and
Very
bring it.
good
Yeah, yeah.
sociological
Okay. All right.
descriptions. And,
Good. All right. So to go back here, I mean, you know, for a few more minutes on this kind of, you know, journey into today, right? I mean, now you begin to see that, you know, the Derridian enterprise at some level is an attempt to decolonize Western European signifiers, right? That it is a guerrilla operation, you know, in the old sense of guerrilla warfare, you know, against the history of philosophy. Heidegger is obviously a German blitzkrieg through this, if I could use this kind of language. We go from the blitzkrieg and trench warfare to guerrilla warfare in the Derridian thing, all the way to the now, you know, the Althusserian hectoring to, you know, of course, Badiou's and to a lesser degree, Zizek's, you know, terrorizing kind of, you know, moment, right? And the return, if you will, in the thinking of absolute terror, right? Thinking through the directoire again, going back to the French Revolution, and remember, we were talking earlier today, the Schumann.
The directory.
Yeah, the directoire, right? Right? You have the great moments, right, for Badiou, the four, you know, concrete events. You know, the French Revolution, of course, which destroyed any semblance of the notion of the divine right of kings and put the word freedom, liberté, right, and fraternité, égalité, you know, freedom and equality out there. Actually, without that, Karl Marx obviously does not exist, you know, in terms of that struggle for equality. And Marx, in some ways, is a very ethical individual because the struggle is really motivated by this very strong desire for justice, not social justice, but for the justice, you know, in which you're struggling
Severing the oppressive
for
relationship.
equality. Right. And why is it some people get to finish at the finish line, you know, start at the finish line in the race called life, and others begin at the starting gate, and if you fail, it's because of your innate deficiency, you weren't good enough, right? and you know, yeah,
Was
et cetera.
Blanqui the famous terrorist? of the
Great,
French
great,
Revolution?
yeah, the constellations, yes, very close to Nietzsche, by the way. Eternal recurrence. Auguste Blanqui, yeah, B-L-A-N-Q-U-I.
Blanqui.
Yeah, it's great. Benjamin has some very interesting things about Blanqui in the philosophy of history. Okay, so,
Wait,
yeah, please,
can you
okay,
just
yeah, no
reiterate
problem.
something? So Heidegger is the blitzkrieg, Derrida's the guerrilla warfare.
Right.
Who was the middle term? There was Badiou, Zizek, which is terrorism of philosophy. And what's
Oh, the hectoring of Althusser.
Althusser.
Yeah, the hectoring. Yeah, these are just, you know, off the cuff remarks.
No, I like it.
Yeah,
though.
good. Okay, that's all right. Yeah. I have Raymond's favorite shirt on, you know, so I have to be a little hectic.
I like it.
That's your. I'm giving it to you, Rachel. Yeah, the hell with Nat Turner. I give it to you. Yeah.
No, not will look good in
Yeah, okay.
I like
It's
that.
a little big in the shoulders, you know. But I've been thinking about what you said about the cut. I was looking in the back of the Right.
It's a real thing.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so this is a kind of general trajectory. There are many relations within this. There's, you know, of course, the phenomenological tradition, which still lives today, not as actively as it was in the 70s. The strongholds were the University of Pittsburgh, the New School for Social Research, obviously, University of California at Berkeley.
Is that Dreyfus?
Hubert Dreyfus and Paul Rabinowitz were there together. Pittsburgh had a few people not really well known. Nick Rescher's very good on Leibniz at Pittsburgh, but a very good department. The New School, of course, the triumvirate of Gurvich, Jonas and Arendt, all German immigrants. Yeah, and Gurvitch was a man. I, of course, told you some good stories of Aaron Gurvitch, right?
There will be no questions.
You come into the lecture hall. Come to the top of the lecture hall. Sit there. Go to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, there are two black sheep in the history of philosophy: René Descartes and Baruch Spinoza. This semester, we will deal with René Descartes in its entirety through the phenomenological reading. If you have a question, don't ask it. There are no questions in this class. This class lasts 1 hour, 50 minutes. All the tape recorders up front. It's great.
You can see like Heidelberg.
And he writes, you see, Yeah. Hated Sartre, hated Heidegger, loved Merleau-Ponty and Husserl. Yeah. Then you had Hans Jonas, the little guy, right? When I was in the 40s, we created a small army to go to Germany. We were going to take out that man. We had it all built up. We had much money. We had a network, etc. Luckily, there was an internal operation that was already afoot, but we were ready here in New York, a group of us. And then he would come, 80-something years old, 85. My memory serves me well. Perfect memory. His wife had a different hair color every time, blue, orange. You were there when some of these characters were there. You had Arendt was just died.
I was
or?
there I started there in '73,
Right.
and then she died in '75.
75, yeah. And this is when you could smoke in the class. She just changed.
How
smoke.
far we've fallen. In
Oh,
the
we were
university.
nothing. We've fallen.
You know what we
but
did today in
part
the
of it-
university?
Yeah.
We had 4 doodle polls to fill.
Yes,
What
that's
is the
that's
doodle
What are you
the-
talking
Oh,
about?
when
A
you're
doodle
available,
poll.
Rachel.
Yeah, when you're
When
available.
you're
There's a
available.
website and
That's
you
what
just-
doodle
we have 4
means.
doodle
When you're
polls we-
available.
we
How
filled out
infantile can
over
you
mean?
email. This
The
became a big
scheduling?
deal this week. Scheduling meetings.
Doodle
Right.
pool.
Yeah, it's
I
called
wouldn't even
doodle.com.
use that term for a child's drawings.
Well,
Doodling.
It is child.
Terrible.
It's infantile. What's going
They're
on?
not humans.
Yeah.
Ah.
And then you had Arendt, yes, you had Jonas and Gurvitch were the big three at the New School, and you had SUNY at Stony Brook, Hugh
Did you have,
Silverman.
the sociologist Schutz?
No, he had died. You have Schutz, sociology? He had died, right? He was there before you. Because
he
you
was
had
another
Nelson.
major figure.
You had Nelson, right? You had Benjamin Nelson
I
as a
think he
teacher.
was there, but I did political science. So I did.
Oh, you were with that
Stanley
Adamati?
Diamond was there.
Well, Stanley was the rest. He would come by philosophy and just laugh. Philosophy. They'd walk by. The dialectical anthropologist. We used to tease him all the time. Stanley, they have a thing about Charles Tilly, a statue. How come they don't have one of you?
Oh.
He's looking. He takes a step back. There's no respect. I went to Algeria. I fought on the front line. My wife, Algeria.
He had
Who's
Pat
wife?
over.
Was
Saul
that-
Padover was there.
Hans Morgenthau was there.
Hans Morgenthau, right?
Oh yeah, Hans Morgan. The Hans Morgan.
The Hans von Morgenthau. Yeah. No, it's a great place.
How far we've fallen.
Yes, indeed. We go down to Andreas, my friend, Andreas Kalivas, right? Always depressed. No, but he's a good guy. He's smart too. But anyway, these guys were giant. I mean, you could see it. And you had Werner Marx, good friend to Heidegger. I own a factory in the Bronx. I come to check on business, and I enjoy teaching the one course here at the New School. I have to go. Look at his watch. I have an appointment at the factory. In the Bronx. I forgot what kind of factory, but it was hilarious. These people. I mean, in a certain way, you could do a great, Billy Wilder films out of this. Yeah. And all kinds of characters.
But I heard an audio of Sherman. They're starting to publish his lectures.
Oh,
too.
good.
It's the same thing today, and for the rest of the semester, we will focus on 2 works. And then whatever.
Oh,
Nietzsche.
yeah.
And it's the same thing. 6 months of 12 pages.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. No, there was a very different tradition. It was before this kind of phony democracy, in a certain way. This kind of
And also to talk for 12 pages for 6 months, you have to actually know. You have to actually be able to do that. You have to
Yes,
know.
he knows. He knows
Otherwise,
his
you
stuff.
can't cover 12 pages.
Yeah. So you have these
6
points in Washington University in St. Louis. The major person there was a man named Herbert Spiegelberg, another German. He wrote the 2-volume history. If you're interested in this, I'm just throwing these out. The phenomenological tradition, 2 volumes, and you'd meet him and you'd see him, sometimes. And oh, I really enjoyed your last. Oh, out of date. It was last year. Out of date. Everybody else, I've written 20 books. Out of date. That's all he would say. Out of date. Bye. Yesterday I released it. Right. He was great at Washington, and Piccone was there, who became, the editor and founder of Kilos, and he translated Enzo Pacci. Someone not read it all. I mean, we should do some work ultimately on Enzo Pacci, because this is a major thinker in the 20th century, Italian phenomenological Marxist, Enzo Pacci, and wrote a book on phenomenology. And I think Science is in the title, or Phenomenology, and it's translated by Paul Piccone, who was the editor of Kilos magazine, which to me was the beacon of Western Marxism in the United States. I actually
Does it still exist?
It does. I wrote a very nice kudo, a kind of homage to him after he died in the first issue of Situations, about Piccone, because he really attuned a whole generation. Yeah.
So what are the places today, you were saying? Today the phenomenology strongholds are...
No, I was saying that during the last 25, 30 years.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if there's still one, it probably would be SUNY at Stony Brook. Yeah. Which is in the neighborhood. Yeah. I mean, Sarah Kaufman, Philippe Lacour-Labarthe, they were Derridians, but they knew phenomenology very well. They were in California, kind of brought in with Dreyfus and others. So Berkeley had a very high-powered, program going on there. I think Nancy, they revolved. Balibar goes to Irvine more because of the cultural studies element there, I think is what. I don't think I think he's hired by French in cultural studies, not by philosophy. So philosophy's had a hard time especially with the Marxists. Anybody that had a Marxist background, very hard to get in the philosophy departments, in the U.S., from outside. And even within,
Well, same as Marxist economics. I mean.
Yeah, that's true, although worse in philosophy, at least economics developed schools because you had Madoff and, they had journalists, right?
Right.
And Madoff and Paul Sweezy, they had that kind of movement, they had affiliations to the party, et cetera.
Right.
Very few of this with,
Yeah, well, Jim O'Connor was an economist, but
Yes.
he couldn't teach in the economics.
No, that's right. He wrote the great book, The Fiscal Crisis.
Right.
Great book.
Yeah, well, Sweezy got forced out of Harvard, right?
Yes, yeah. I had the pleasure of meeting him. That was a very nice
Yeah.
afternoon at the New School. Yeah. Lived on Park Avenue South. These people lived large, some of them. Yeah. Anyway, so that's sort of what's going on today. In terms of the left Heideggerians, I think I pointed this out. To me, my own work. I'm trying to focus more and more on the work of Kostas Axelos, Axelos. I know Arto has the book Future
Thin book,
Marx,
yeah.
his series of lectures.
Is anything else
Has a try?
available?
No, not in English yet. Yeah, I'm in the process of translating The Destiny of Modern Greece, which he wrote after World War II. I think it's a timely moment given the Syriza failure to bring this out. He wrote it after the Civil War, The Destiny of Modern Greece. But he's very interesting as a left Heideggerian. Pacci is a left Heideggerian. Jean-Marie Vincent on abstract and concrete labor in France. So you have this group that kind of materialized, in the 70s, 60s and 70s, that sort of came out of a reading of Being and Time, and especially for the Marxists, the distinction between the Vorhanden and the Zumhanden, that we talked about, the ready, yes.
That Jean-Marie Vincent? Can you spell the name? Is
Yeah,
that book
Vincent,
available
I'm
in
sorry.
English? Because
Yes,
I've heard
it
of
is.
it, but
Yes, it is. You can look. I'd be, if you don't mind turning on your computer again to see if it's in print.
what is it
Yeah.
called?
Abstract and concrete labor. love the mustard in the salad. Put the mustard.
Who he did?
Yeah. That's the characters. Yeah. How many of you seen the movie Jonah Will Be 25 in the year 2000?
Yeah, we've seen it.
Absolutely beautiful film.
Yeah.
When you really
Sausage.
think about Marco and what he does with the sausage, you know, he brings
Right.
in. It's just a wonderful, wonderful film about history and, you know, just beautiful film. Yeah. And we're really, that generation born in the 70s is basically pushing 50 now, you know. It's pretty amazing that we have come to this after all that promise, you know, back then. I mean, you know, but the real hero
Well,
of
but
that
the end-
film,
the end
no,
of
no,
the
the real
film-
hero is the guy on the bike, Matthew,
Yeah.
who goes back to work.
What's the
right?
name of the book?
The book is Abstract and Concrete Labor. Just put
Nothing
in
shows up.
Jean-Marie Vincent. Yeah, Jean Vincent. Yeah, Jean-Marie. Yeah, and then go to Vincent. Right. Nothing's coming up for him?
It is. Shoes. Book.
Shoes?
Book.
Book. No, it's
Are you sure it's the
out of
name, or-
print. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure.
Let's check the Russian site.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Probably don't have it either, but
Yeah. I mean, I can get you a copy. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah.
it's spelled with a hyphen. Jean-Marie.
Yeah, Jean-Marie, not Jean-Pierre. I'm sorry. Jean-Marie.
They have for the books in France. Oh, abstract labor or critique. Is
Yes,
that it?
yes,
They
of
have it. The
course.
Russians have it.
I don't know, you know. See, I know what it is. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, boy.
b-ok.org is the website. Download
B
it.
dash.
b-ok.org.
B dash.
B as in boy?
Yeah, b-ok. It used to be books, but they blocked it, so they
Oh.
changed it.
B dash, okay.
.org.
Okay.
Well, let's.
This Putin's a genius, huh?
LibGen still works, right?
Yeah.
LibGen I usually go to.
It's good. So it's a great work, right? The critique.
Oh wait, now Amazon shows it. Their search function is stupid.
Yeah,
It's
I can
$50.
Amazon, I can't find
It's $50. Jim Cohen and Jean-Marie.
Yeah, Jim Cohn, you know, is a contributor to Situations.
Really?
Yeah, he's a good friend of ours. Yeah, yeah. He's in Paris.
How many?
Yeah.
156 pages.
Yeah, no,
19.
it's short, but very dense. It's
Yeah.
like the dialectics of the concrete. There's some books out there that nobody really has access to anymore. It's not on the bookshelf. Dialectics of the Concrete is another one by Karol Kosik, the
gonna
great
try.
Czech Republic guy, the Dialectics of the Concrete. Since we're talking about concretization, and this will, you know, we'll yeah. Karol Kosik. This was translated into English by Mark Swartowski.
$35.
Yeah. Oh, is that all it is? In a hardcover?
Yeah. Used though.
Okay. What kind of condition?
Well, it says new. You can get it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Used is $35, but if you
Yeah.
want new, it's $220.
Yeah. Right. You know, Marx is getting expensive.
Yeah.
Good books. Getting expensive. Yeah. All right. So let me just go back over a couple of other things too. I mean, the influence is amazing. I'm glad we had the chance to go through this. I mean, did you want to focus on any part? I wanted, you know, today to again kind of reorient that, you know, one reading of this text is that it is a philosophy of subjectivity, that this triad of the world, care, and self, I think is important for us today. I think it's very important in terms of building a community and an economy of care and contribution. Very, very important for us going forward. That care underlying the temporality, underlying the, you know, the movement of being towards death. How do we really establish that? Can the left ultimately open up a program that really sustains that instead of always the critique that you're getting screwed by your, you know, boss or whatever? Yeah, of course. What the you know, F is new, right? In a sense, you know, we need something new to put out there. So I mean, we're kind of, you know, moving around now to trying to say, you know, what is really being offered by a left, or a re-emergent left, or a semi-emergent, or a left that's in the cave, kind of crawling its way up, at least to the things ready to hand. You know, this is a real issue in a lot of ways. Okay, so again, you know, I want to emphasize the Verstehen, the understanding, once again, how important this chapter is. Understanding itself and understanding in temporality. And as you know from the looking at the chapter headings, if you go through this, you see how Heidegger operates. I mean, now that you've read through it, or you know, read a good part of it, you begin to see how he repeats, right? I mean, it's very interesting, the structure of the text. Mm-hmm. So we begin with the you know, the existential analytic, right? The preparatory, right? And then we get into the historical in the beginning up to chapter 5, and then we begin to look at Dasein, you know, in terms of mode of attunement, and then chapter 31 and 32 of chapters 5, or sections 31, 32 of chapter 5, I think are essential to a deeper, comprehensive, you know, grasp of this work. Dasein is understanding, and understanding and interpretation, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can go from there into the dictogenic society. So you have many sections to work with here. All right. So then the other, and then this is repeated, as you know, in chapter 4, section 68, the temporality of understanding. Right. So we go from the temporality, you know, we go from basically the thematic analysis of being in a world to its temporality. So Heidegger is always moving, once again, I'll erase some of this. Is always moving from being in, remember this is crucial, always think, if you're going to think like a Heideggerian, you're going to think with Heidegger, you always have to think in. I'm in a world, right? Not in a space, first and foremost, I'm in a world, right? And it's the world worlding to you, which is much more part of this pre-predicative experience than, you know, the selfhood or whatever, you know, at this point. And this is going then to the temporality of being in. And you begin to see the in, right, as understanding, as attunement. And you begin to see the temporal structures. Yep. Okay, so hopefully you'll really remember this as being in a world, right? in a world. Okay, and remember the world itself, I'm going to just go over this again. We have the Zuhanda, the ready to hand, right? And then the Vorhanda, the objectively present to hand. Mm-hmm. And the Vorhanden is basically an extension, if you will, or a rethinking, if you will, of Kant's notion of Gegenstand, the object that stands against us, as well as the object, right, in terms of a rearticulation of Descartes', you know, res extensa, the extended things from the res cogiton, the thinking thing, right? And whereas the Zuhanden is a much more interesting place to be, you know, that's where you get the sense of the existentialia, right, as well as the equipment and concern. So in the objectively present, we're going to try to always uncover, we're always deconstructing what is objectively present. So the doctor tells you have X disease, you want to uncover what that means, because that's an objectively present analysis of something. You want to be able to see, why is this taking place, right? Why this treatment? Why this combination of drugs, etc. Okay, any questions? So being in, right? And the being in is really about the care, right? That's world, we're talking about world, and that becomes things, equipment, right? Then you have world also being with others, in the world of another. And that's a very interesting way of approaching politics. Understand the being with others as worlding, not as typical kind of standard, oh, you're poor like me, you have a pension like me, or something like that. It's really a kind of way of doing, an ethnography, if you will, in terms of approaching people through their worlds, being in a world. I mean, I think this is a very fruitful way of going about things, going about the research. Okay, so then of course we have care, that's being in a world, both as attunement and as interpretation. And remember that attunement has thrownness and vacticity, and it's kind of pure mood. And then we got to this category of Verfallen and its relationship to anxiety and fear, right? And we can, speaking of fear, I thought we did a pretty good job of looking at that in terms of objects of fear and how fear then becomes an administered world today. Our administered world, with all due respect to the Frankfurt School who came up with the term, is really one of fear, really the management of fear. This is what's going on.
What sections
That's
do
what
these?
passes for politics these days.
Yes, that is politics, is the management of fear. Very good point. What was that, David? I'm
What
sorry.
sections are we on? Are you?
Well, I was speaking to the sections on fear and anxiety, and that really comes up more in the chapter 3, right, as well as I think more in chapter 3. Let me see what exact sections. Boy, let me see. I'm looking at Heidegger, and I'm translating it to some personal things here. Yeah, I should be careful. I have to watch my mind at work today. Yeah, oh boy. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to mark the page though. Alienation is tranquilization, right? If you go to the section on being towards death, and especially, you begin to see the sections on fear and anxiety. So the flight, if you turn to page 240, a preliminary sketch, David, of the existential and ontological structure of death, right, is part of that, as well as being towards death and the everydayness of Dasein, right? And then, all of this is, I guess you could say all the way up to the end of maybe 262. So 240 to 262 is really engaging this existential and ontological structure of death, what it means to be towards death, and what is an authentic being towards death. Okay, so again, this is happening in the world of Verfallen. And Verfallen, I think we translated it as a dictogenic, or as a falling prey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like this notion of falling prey to something. Very interesting notion. You fall prey to something rather than you're, quote, just not addicted, right? Addiction is good, but falling prey is interesting because you are kind of like falling prey to the vultures of the addiction, to the vultures of the objectively, constituted, present in hand, scientific community, and all of this in some ways. Okay, so with the being in, you get interpretation and project and circumspection, and we talked about this, the different notions of sight, right, in Heidegger. And then, of course, we went into speech, and this is a very, very important part of this text. Again, something that to me is the articulation of so much work after Heidegger, especially Derrida, the Derridians, and to a degree Foucault, right? Yeah, how language can become a symptom, right? What language does, in many, many ways. So this becomes, again, a very important section, going back and forth here again to the section on the worldliness of the world, reference in signs, in pages 66 through maybe about 80, 86 before we get into the Cartesian moment, as well as section 34, crucial 34 to me, 35, 36, 37, and 38. But crucial is 31 through 34. If you read something in here and you really want greater, I think 31 to 34 is very interesting in this way. These are the discourse and language. Okay. The other part that we, engaged, and I mentioned this earlier, of course, was, and remember, we basically interpreted this Verstehen as taking control of. Understanding is taking control of something. So keep that in mind too. It's not only to stand under, but it's taking control. It's a very powerful, I think, material, way of looking at what it means to understand. You have to take control of something, right? In a way. Okay. So then the other very two obviously crucial sections are the final section on temporality, and which is the horizon, and we went through that somewhat, and at the same time, and I thought the crucial descriptions there were against datability, clock time, things that we're all very bound by, and I see this as part of inauthentic everydayness, busyness. Busyness is part of the inauthentic, everydayness. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
You can see how he despised like clock time
Despises.
as the essence of inauthentic
Right, exactly.
foreclosure of being.
Yes, no, absolutely. Yeah,
Rachel and I were talking about this.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of a side, but
that's okay.
Jeff Bezos, Amazon guy, has, I think it was $10 million, spent $10 million on making a clock that ticks once a year.
Put that name in the book.
Oh, he's on the top of the list.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But in a sense, it's this gesture towards
Alphabetically, it works very good.
Yeah.
we were
Before
sort of
Jobs.
saying, like, Rachel and I were sort of discussing, like, why would he make a clock that ticks once a year? And
He claims it's.
I was sort of saying must be towards this idea of counting the epochal time, but actually, in a Heideggerian view, you cannot count
No,
an epochal
it's
time.
not counting.
No.
Yeah.
That's the Nina Simone song.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. Count your fingers.
So this idiot, who is basically just some kind of autistic genocidal maniac,
Yeah.
essentially.
He is.
Uh,
That's what's running. I was very well put. You should
Absolutely.
write
That
that down.
can't even
Yeah.
understand.
Genocidal, homicidal.
that-
Good thing they
that
don't
you
read
cannot-
this stuff.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
They would be even more powerful.
Well, they have people that go to work for them that have familiarity with this language, and then the language becomes extremely reified, which should be a discussion always, is how this language, ultimately the language of authenticity and authenticity,
Yeah.
the language of care, the language of being in a world, understanding, is really completely co-opted. So many times, you see it all the time. I mean, the best appropriations of Russian formalism are done in Madison Avenue now. In advertisements, you see the elements there at work.
Apparently, this was one of the goals of like free jazz musicians, is how to play music that cannot be co-opted easily at all by the record labels or by the radio stations. Like,
Yeah.
make it so demanding on the listener that you just don't, you can't easily co-opt it. You can't sell 1 million copies of the Sun Ra Orchestra albums, and they were right. Like they kind of, although maybe it will be co-opted in 100, if necessary, I don't know, but have a piece that's 25 minutes long, you can't play it on the radio.
Yeah.
There's no melody to sing.
Only on KCR, and they're going out of business, unfortunately.
Exactly.
I sent them money,
I had a friend who runs this heart as a black Muslim. He's like 65, like amazing sax player, public school teacher, Masood Tariq Tal. He runs a radio station called Gardens of Tranquility and Contemplation. He was like a Malcolm X kind of fellow in Harlem Community Radio, and he once he had an interview of Yusef Lateef, this kind of great jazz musician.
Seduced one of my girlfriends at the Village Gate in
I didn't know that.
1968. Yeah,
But-
I'm serious. I mean, yeah, Sarah Wilson.
So Tariq
was
said to Lateef, he said something like, so this was political, like when Sun Ra, he said music that you can't really, so is that he really made music that you can't dance to, people have said, or sing to, and Yusef Lateef said, who can't dance to it? He's like,
See,
I
that's the
dance to it
burn
all the
moment,
time.
yeah.
He's like, you gotta know.
Absolutely.
He's like, you gotta know how to dance to it,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which is the codes,
That's right.
the codes.
Yeah.
Always
You
the
have to-
codes, yeah. And I mean, Monk in the great little, I don't know if you saw the film on the
No,
Jazz
I wanna
Loft,
see it. I
the
wanna see it.
Eugene Smith Jazz Loft photographs and then the film that he did while he was there. And Monk saying, the guy's trying to play, etc. And Monk gets over the chair, goes over, starts dancing. You play with your feet, man. He starts like this, up within the keyboards. You play with your feet. And it's true. When you really think about Nietzsche, what Nietzsche is doing physiologically, he's saying it's only in the dance that you can tell of the highest things. Really in a way. I mean, this is the difference between Heidegger's march, long march forward, in a sense, the future antitheory, whereas Nietzsche is thinking about the dance over the abyss, always, and the long stretch.
And the razor's
and I
edge.
had this figure, the figure of the Owl of Minerva, the Hegelian Owl of Minerva, looking at the, Zarathustra, trying to say, can I recapitulate dialectically the nomadism of the Zarathustra or the Übermensch, moving. And this is still a big question. Can the dialectical system recapitulate and recapture, the nomadic, in a certain way? This is a very interesting problem in the
I
history of
think the
philosophy.
comrades
And I
in
do this
Bulgaria,
through figures.
their approach
the
is
figures.
you
Yeah,
infuse
yeah.
the dialectic
Right.
with the prepredicative thinking.
Yeah, so that's a good way of doing
Well,
it.
I think
you can
he does,
fuse it.
actually.
Yes,
That's
and
what
he's
they're
doing
trying
this.
to do.
He's doing
Yeah.
this. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Because I was thinking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
this all week,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
to me, the kind of the axis of this book
Getting
actually.
dangerous, Josh. That's
I know,
good.
dangerous.
Like that guy next
No.
to Jose Dolores. Right? Yeah. You're beginning to think. That's a good thing.
To me, the axis of this book was really
Yes.
the
Okay,
concept
cool.
of destiny,
Yes.
essentially.
Yes. Amor fati.
Yeah.
Yeah. And destiny for Heidegger, the epochal is the sending. Something is sent to you.
Right.
It's a gift. And let me do this too.
Well,
I mean,
and
since
just
we're-
to
yeah,
this
please, yeah.
dialectical point, because in the real moment, in the truthful moment of revolution, let's say, you have to have this kind of sense of destiny.
You have to believe in it, you're
Implicit, yeah, exactly. You cannot have this dialectical.
Look at the back
conversation.
cover of Situations. I did this the
plunge,
other
yeah.
day.
Leap.
It
Yeah.
has the Chukalas and Stanley openings, and then Glick, myself, and Dienst. I'll bring it in next time. We have a wonderful quote from Horkheimer, what it means to be a revolutionary intellectual.
Mm.
Exactly what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. So yes, this amor, the love of the facts, the love, you embrace it, you take it up as your destiny, right? But the destiny, the sending, is coming from the gift. In French, it's il, yeah, right?
Mhm.
It gives. It gives. This is the givenness
Yeah.
of everyday life. This is the pre.
But the
Yeah.
givenness is subject to change by your action, as Schurman would say. The action is sort of the point of it all.
The acting.
Not the action.
Not the acting.
Yeah, yeah.
Acting,
It's in
not
the-
action.
I always
He's
mess
very
it up.
Kantian.
The
He's
acting,
not
yeah.
Hegelian.
The acting, not
He's
the action.
He's very Kantian.
The acting.
Be careful.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be careful, as Stanley would say. Slow down, Michael. Right.
I think it was very Kantian, you're saying.
Schurman. Schurman in the use of the term acting instead of action. Right? It's very Kantian. No, and he's trying to bring that up, being as acting. Yeah. See, the difference here, I mean, just to make another aside, but I think this is interesting. The Freudian psychoanalytical is based on the theatrical, right? The theatrical acting, the acting out, all the phrases that are being used. The Deleuzian and Guattarian unconscious is the factory. Really. So think about that in a way in terms of the shift that takes place between 1900 through the 50s into, say, 68, 70 when they start doing their work,
I see.
right? No longer is the unconscious. What a mistake to call it id. You should have called it it.
Yeah.
It fucks, it shits, it eats, it does this, right? This is the beginning of the anti-Oedipus.
Anti-Oedipus.
The factory as unconscious, right? Right? In a way, yeah. So very interesting how materialistic this is versus the Viennese couch and the theater, you know. And in a way, whose theater do they take up in this book? It's two theaters, Kleist against Goethe and Artaud against Brecht.
Yeah,
It's very interesting that when you begin to, you know, put this together.
Yeah, Josh Friedman just came out with a book,
That's a dirty word to our friend Tony Granovich. Anyway, I heard of the tirade against him this morning,
Oh, really?
against Josh Friedman. But yeah, tell me about Josh Friedman. What did Josh
Come out with a
do?
new book,
It's a labor historian, by the way, the
Behemoth.
people that don't know him.
Behemoth about the factory, basically looking
Well,
at
you know who
history of
wrote the
factory.
first book, huh?
Leviathan. No,
No, yeah, well, yes, Leviathan and Hobbes wrote it, but who wrote the modern Behemoth? Do you remember?
Behemoth?
Yeah, Behemoth, yeah, Behemoth, yeah. Yeah, Franz Neumann.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Franz Neumann of the Frankfurt School.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, you know, who died earlier, and his wife married Herbert Marcuse, Marcuse's second wife, and yeah, Franz Neumann. This is a major work. You need to get something?
No, no.
Okay.
A little cold.
Oh, it's cold. You want me to put on the heat a little bit?
No, it's too noisy. I don't like it.
I'm sorry.
It's too noisy.
Okay.
Can wear a
Thank you.
jacket.
Yes, okay. I'm trying, I'm telling you. Anyway, so it gives, right? I mean, the given, and you know, in a way, this is the gift,
Yeah.
right? This is the gift, not
Yeah.
the don, but the gift before the material gift,
Yeah.
right?
And it's
Yeah.
interesting, actually,
Yeah,
in this
please,
text
yeah.
when he,
Yeah.
and you kind of get the sense when philosophy turns to language, Heidegger is like looking specifically.
Well,
at
the turn
it,
to language
right?
becomes determinate. It always had a turn towards language since,
Okay.
since Plato.
Okay.
I mean, you know, because you go back and you read a fundamental text on writing and speaking, such as the Phaedrus or the Cratylus or the Gorgias. All of these texts are writing about the writing of language and
Right.
what the written text and the speaking text is about. So this is a very long tradition in this respect.
Yeah.
But these people are figuring out the determinate role
I
that
see.
language speaks us.
Right.
Language is the house of being. But
Which,
go on, I'm
don't you
sorry.
think he kind of does that in this time in being where he analyzes the it of the it gives?
See you,
essentially?
comrades.
See you in the
Take care.
comrade.
Yeah.
See you, Arda.
See you in the future. Yeah.
Like that to me was really like interesting because to me when people start looking at language as determinate, I often sort of like why would they want to do philosophy this way? But when Heidegger says what is the it of the it gives essentially, and then sort of analyzes destiny from what is giving
Right.
essentially,
Right.
you can see why that is
Yeah.
interesting.
So history becomes a history of sendings.
Yeah.
A sending of the givens, right? I mean, it's passive in a way. It's against or it goes left, but it's somewhere against. Hitherto, philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point is to transform it. For Heidegger, you know, we are the vessels through which this passes.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a kind of passivity in that moment, right? Etc. Why the ecologists like him so much in terms of the nature, letting nature be as it is, and you know, etc. You know, this whole thing of Der Ister, the film about the river, you know, the Hölderlin poem. Yeah. So this is this is an interesting thing. So the sending becomes part of the epochal thing. So being is sent to the ancients as the one, the thinking of the one and the many, right? But the one itself, the Pythagorean complex, if you will, right? The mathematical, the birth of the continent of mathematics with Thales, thinking through not only the one, right? Yeah. This is it, and then it switches to the Latin. To natura, to nature, right? And then we live in the epoch on the verge, we're on the cusp, if you will, between self-consciousness and cybernetics. You know, we still retain a little bit of this self-consciousness, consciousness of self, and the reasons of self,
Right.
but, you know, still very much dominated by this cyber space and cyber, you know,
Right.
hardware, et cetera, in everyday life, which includes robotics and everything else. I mean, this is really about the communication sciences and, particular disorders. Yeah, that we see, right? We see the disorders that come out of this.
Yeah, it's really interesting
Right.
to look at how all of the brouhaha around the group in England that supposedly got Trump elected,
Oh, the SLC or something, under the shell of the, what is it,
Well, it's all cybernetics. It's all Analytica. What is it?
yeah.
Cambridge Analytica.
Cambridge
Cambridge
Analytica,
Analytica.
which is really a shell company for this British thing, the
Right.
SLC, that has all the
Right.
techies. But interestingly enough, there were a lot of left-leaning people there who realized that the drift of the whole thing was to get, towards the far right, and they began to leave, well, I mean,
Yeah.
what can I say, I mean.
Well, I mean, to
But
the
it's-
Heideggerian
they were
mind,
replaced
this
by
is
the-
an example of, everydayness gone amok. And there's
Right.
nothing that really, it has nothing to do with, what is being sent, right? It's just a massive symptom. That the political in this context is not the political. It's not the polis at all.
Right.
Even though it affects us in our everyday life, we get very long-winded journalistic accounts of it. It's going to continue to be investigated and all of that. But at the same time, to him, this is the banality of everyday life, in some ways, and everyday politics. It's not really about building a future. It's not really about, the authenticity of a future. The resoluteness. This is something that goes with this worldview that is constructed on objectivity, or so-called objectivity.
But it's
The things
banality-
present at hand. Yeah.
Banality at the edge of the abyss.
Yeah, what do you mean by that? I mean, see, to me, the abyss is something that is experienced by very few and stay there,
Oh.
whereas the rest are, kind of like, I mean,
No, I
I'm
mean,
just
but
wondering.
as in, what is the Hotel Abyss?
Of the Grand Hotel
Grand
Abyss,
Hotel Abyss, yeah.
of Luke Hodge talking about Adorno.
Like the
Yeah.
nuclear clock being moved to, the closest it's been to,
Well, Bolton is the symptom of the abyss.
Well,
He's
it's
Jack the
abyss,
Ripper.
Yeah.
Jack Ripper, General Jack Ripper.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Right.
With
Yeah,
his- with his-
they poisoned our water supply, the North
Right.
Koreans.
right.
Our precious
Rocket Man and our precious bodily
Our precious
fluids.
bodily
It's gonna
fluids,
upset
right.
my curl on my mustache.
Yeah, that's the only
Right.
thing that Trump didn't like about him was his walrus mustache. He said everything else he was fine, but that's why it took
He
him a
said
while.
that?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
why it
that's
took him
good.
a while.
At least he
to
has
avoid
low
it.
humor.
He
That's
doesn't
probably
like
true, though.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You can hear them when they meet with each other. Who are you, like the walrus, the Beatles? What's the matter? You never got out of that? Didn't you grow up? This is the way they talk to each other. I hear this nonsense all the time in family, yeah.
This is hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, David,
See you,
we'll
David.
see you maybe in about 2 weeks. I'm kind of contingent on travel plans, but I'll be sending out both kind of reading list and stuff for the next go round. And Rachel and Josh have very kindly offered their place on April 15th on a Sunday to do markets, money, and Wall Street bestiary. Where we would do a kind of,
Tax day.
4-week journey through Phantasmagoria,
That's
right?
hilarious.
Yeah.
No, they'll
Yeah,
be
so we'll
nice.
keep you
Okay.
informed, yeah.
Terrific. Yeah, there's a good piece in the monthly review. John Bellamy Foster's lead piece on in the Marx and ecology.
Yeah, well, he's big on that.
He's big, but they've found a lot of interesting stuff that's come out. That's,
Still using the metabolic as their principle?
Yeah, but kind of balancing exploitation versus expropriation. Versus
Appropriation versus expropriation,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
yeah.
sort of like-
We must expropriate the expropriators, huh?
Something like
Yeah.
but it's interesting. It's more nuanced to the dialectic.
Okay, good, okay, well, I'll take a look. He's a bright guy, there's no question about it.
I
yeah.
also recommend the Young Marx if people haven't seen.
It's out on DVD in another month.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's coming out on DVD. Yeah. Is it playing in the city right now
Yeah,
still?
it was playing
Was
at
it
the
the
Metro.
Metrograph?
It's still there? Or?
Not
I don't know,
anymore.
but it was, then it was the Jacob Burns in Westchester, and now it's at another theater in Westchester, so I
Uh-huh.
think they were originally gonna
Yeah,
show.
I saw it 6 months ago in Montreal. I saw it in
Yeah.
November of last year, about 5 months ago.
Well, you know, it's a-
Yeah, no, it's good. It's
Yeah,
worth seeing,
yeah,
and it's great for classroom to introduce.
Yeah,
Marx.
sure.
Yeah, it would be great to use and pedagogically, and I think that was part of his intention, was as an educational, instrument. Yeah.
So,
Good.
he knows his
What's
stuff.
this next movie?
Okay.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
I had a chat with him. Did he say? Did he?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
supposedly
Take care.
another
Yeah,
one
Jim
on the
and
way.
Ralph
and
Who's
I
this?
can't remember.
I did.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Well, next time we'll have to.
Yeah. We'll talk about it. Yeah. Okay.
I'll know what the next one is.
What happened? Yeah, I know you told me. I went to talk to him after the showing. I went with Josh and Rachel. I'm not your Negro, the bald one. And I went up and, had a very short chat with him. But the suggestion was that since he did a film on Lumumba, why wouldn't he do a film about assassinations of leftist leaders, and particularly, people of color, so to speak, right? And he said, yes, he was working on that. We talked about Cabral. We talked about Michel, and why don't you do this? You have Lumumba, Malcolm, Cabral, all of which were essential to the destruction of some part of a movement at a critical time, And I mean, of course, you can mention other people in there, Black Messiah like Fred Hampton, etc. Yeah. So I think this is what he's working on. I don't know if that's the next movie, but he did speak to that. Yeah. But he's mostly known for The Death of a Prophet, an acted version of Lumumba, and then Patrice Lumumba, the documentary, which is about 60 minutes, and now I'm Not Your Negro, and there are a couple of things in between. But, he's becoming more interesting with age, to my mind.
Yeah.
He's one of these people
But
that's
even
grown.
the way he talked, because we saw the
The
young Karl
Negro,
Marx after we saw
Yeah,
Our Negro,
yeah. He
and
was better, huh?
He deflected, the garbage questions, and
Good.
was more militant actually.
Good, excellent.
About violence.
Right, okay,
So I thought
good.
that was good.
Good. Well, the old man said it was the violent overthrow. He didn't say overthrow.
Mm-hmm.
He said the violent overthrow. I mean,
Yeah, who did that, the film on violence? The one, that, what's her face narrated, basically narrating Fanon.
oh yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's called On Violence.
Right.
But it goes through
Right.
a number of, the African liberation
Yeah.
movements. And Lauren Hill,
Just
narrates
talking
it.
about her.
Oh, yeah,
Rachel
Yeah.
loves Lauren.
I love Lauren.
yeah. But it's good. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Don't have to live like a refugee.
She certainly does not.
Yeah. I know.
But,
Yeah, she was in Montreal one. I had lunch one day when Wycliffe Jean and his entourage came to this place on right next to the Maine to Saint Laurent. It's very funny. Yeah, just sitting around with. I think this is his political phase too, where he was going to run for the president, or he did run for president of Haiti. Yeah.
Wycliffe Jean.
She's great. I mean,
I don't know, but
she's got a
she's
great voice and really out there. Yeah.
No, the Dosso Cello, so Bob Marley's grand Dosso,
Right.
Dosso with her own Marleys. No, she's a model.
Oh, really?
She's not good.
Not good.
No.
I saw your friend at Cafe Paulette, by the way.
Who?
The woman that you
Oh,
said
I
that
like
you-
her.
yeah, she was there.
Oh,
My
friend.
that supermodel.
Yeah.
My friend.
Yeah.
We'll see her later.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Well, what do you think? You want to talk a little more? Or you want to go?
I don't
have
know. I mean,
something to eat, or yeah.
We could. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, we've said a lot. I mean, we can certainly return to this. I
Yeah.
mean, again, I think the crucial, I mean, just to give a last minute kind of highlighting of chapters. Of course, one wants to read the introduction to see the task at work.
Yeah.
So you would read pages 1 through 37. you can basically look at, kind of skim over, the preparatory fundamental analysis. But I think the thing on world from 14 chapters or sections 14 through 18 is very important, or 14 through 21, right? Very important, on worldiness of the world. And I think
world.
that's worth rereading.
Yeah.
And then the they self, chapter or section 27, and of course chapter 5, 29, attunement, fear, understanding, all these sections, all the way through 34. I think the others follow. You can glance at that: idle talk, curiosity, ambiguity, and falling prey. So I would look at that carefully. I would also, of course, read 41 very carefully. Care is the being of Dasein is care, right? Very, very important. And also, I would look at this section on truth, Dasein, disclosedness, and truth, which is section 44. And then 50, 51, 52, 53 on the existential being towards death. And then I would certainly look at section 60, the existential structure of the authentic potentiality of being. And of course, the section on temporality, chapter 4, very, very important, especially the temporality of understanding, 68a. And I also would say section 71. And 74, the section on essential constitution of historicity. Right, and then the two things that he goes on, 76 and 77, on the origin of historiography and historicity of Dasein, and then the correction to Dilthey and Yorick. And then, of course, I would read chapter 6 very carefully. In fact, if you were going to reread this, I would reread maybe teleologically from the end, begin with that into the history section, and then go back to the introduction. I think that would be a good reading strategy, just as a suggestion, protocol. So, I certainly enjoyed it, and I thank you guys for
too. Thank you,
listening
Michael.
to the electrical shock and the lightning striking many times here, and there'll be more to come. And I'm trying to work through the marks. I think I would begin with economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, of which the movie he's already written, the Paris manuscripts, and and we would begin there, and I'm going to do it basically on Marx and the tradition, and then the kind of outside the tradition Marx. So it would be Lukács, Frankfurt School, close readings of these schools, Karl Korsch, etc., up to the Italian schools, the two Italian schools, the French school, and maybe a little bit of the American, right? I'm going to try to figure out how many weeks it's going to take to do this, and then I would do the derivative moments, what went outside, both in terms of an extension of Marx through financialization, the people that are doing this, the critique of Marx by some of the philosophical community where Marx was under-theorized for our time, right? And we'll go from there, yeah, and that'll be should be fun. But we'll read Reification and Class Consciousness of the Proletariat. We'll read the Principles of Historical Materialism. My guiding question, to give you the task for the preparatory, is historical materialism as a method enough today? Is it really a rigorous enough method? Have we forgotten how to do it? And I want to say this about Heidegger. Maybe this is a good place to sum up. Heidegger was not into research. He was into thinking. He thought research sometimes really clouded thinking in many ways. And this is, again, another thing that's very interesting about him, that research was science, not thinking. And you have this kind of, tension always already going on there. Yeah? So keep that in mind, too, this whole notion of the things present to hand, that we kept I kept hammering on earlier on, 9 weeks, 10 weeks ago, when we were, still on Broadway and 72nd. So, try to think about that. Why is science so embedded, and what is research, first of all, and secondly of all, why this combination, and why does he make this proposition? Science does not think. The being of science must be interrogated. What does that mean? That shakenness, that solicitude that's going on, in Heidegger. And then how would that fit with Marx? What is Marx? We'll talk about that too, going forward. And is historical materialism a science of history?
Right.
So these are some of the questions
That's my question.
we'd like to raise. Yeah, okay, yeah. No problem. The more the merrier on the good ship of fools here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean,
Please. Yeah.
there was a huge, it's funny, I was reading, the guy who did the bad translations of Capital, supposedly.
Aveline.
No, oh gosh, he was a German guy, he did the Kerr editions. God, what was his name?
You sure not talking about Samuel Aveline? And
No.
okay.
No, I'm talking, he was the one who translated the Kerr editions.
The Charles Kerr out of Chicago, the
Yeah,
publishing house.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
But it was funny because then we went through it with Stanley, and I had a Kerr edition, and we were doing the
Capital, right?
Yeah, Capital. We were doing the Penguin edition. And,
Ben Folks.
Huh?
Yeah, it's a good translation.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
But it was
Long
totally
ride.
different. I mean, but he was so into science, because I read another one of his pieces on Marx.
Well, there was a generation that, said this is, what
Yeah, science
Einstein's theory of relativity
a
is to
worship-
physics,
a
Marx
worship
is
of science,
the
like a
Einstein
religion.
of social sciences, and that this was, hard science ultimately.
Right. Right.
This to me was a very bad
Yeah.
moment in the history, because this is how orthodoxy, dogmatism in the
Can't
worst
think
form,
about it that way.
settles in. And we
Right.
have so much of that on, just go to a left forum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just talking in the hallways at the left forum. Come to the situations table. We get all kinds of cast of characters there, wanting to, get into debates. It's like yeah.
It's true.
So anyway, I hear. I have to look up who the Kerr person is. I think I remember this thing. Yeah, and Prometheus Books, huh? Was that the name of the label? It was Kerr, but they called it a Prometheus book. No.
No,
No,
it's
okay.
Charles Kerr.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they,
Yeah.
but they taught it, because one of the books that I got was from this school over by Union. It was from their library,
The Jefferson,
I guess.
the communist school. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a good school. They read Aristotle at 16 in that school.
Huh.
They read the Organon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Anyway, interesting. Well, I would like us to use the Struick version of the economic and philosophical manuscript. I'll send it. Unterman, now I know who you're talking about now.
Yeah.
Unterman was the first.
Yeah.
And then the problem with the international publishers of this, the Aveling, is that the workers were educated on this, and it was very dogmatic, and
Right.
it didn't leave any room for the imagination. And it goes to show you again how important language is, and in terms of the determined.
It was very readable.
Yes, no, I know
his
that.
English was very readable.
Yeah.
But very kind of wrong.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
according to the like he transposed subjective and objective, which was kind of problematic.
He did that. What do you mean? He translated?
Well, he would translate what in the Penguin edition would be translated as subjective.
Right.
He would translate as objective.
I see. You know, Dasein in Hegel is existence.
Mhm.
That's how it's been translated. Whereas in Heidegger, the being there, right? It's a big difference, I mean, you know, in
Yeah.
terms of thinking about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, one is outstandingness, you know, your
Right.
existence, right? In
Mhm.
terms of its relationship to the old Latinates. Whereas in the other one, it's, you know, the
Yeah.
there-ness of, you know,
Yeah.
awareness, you know, you have awareness and awareness together, you know, which is interesting. So, you know, which is, yeah. So, yeah, translation's a very difficult thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, apparently he translated it while he was working on a chicken farm in Florida.
Oh, boy. Okay.
No, I mean, but